Do you struggle to solve fractions with radicals in the denominator, like this problem here? If so, in this video, I will show you how to easily solve these kinds of problems. Let's get started. Let's take the problem 5 over the square root of 5. The first thing you want to do is multiply the numerator and the denominator of this fraction by the denominator, the square root of 5. Once you multiply this fraction by the denominator, you will have 5 times the square root of 5 in the numerator and the square root of 25 in the denominator. Looking at the denominator, 25 is a perfect square and can be reduced to 5. Once the denominator is reduced, we are left with the fraction 5 times the square root of 5 over 5. At this point, we can further reduce this fraction because the 5 in the numerator and the 5 in the denominator reduce to 1. Giving us the square root of 5 as the answer. Let's take a similar problem. 18 over the square root of 3. The first thing you want to do is multiply the numerator and the denominator by the denominator, the square root of 3. Once you multiply the fraction by the denominator, you will have 18 times the square root of 3 over the square root of 9. Looking at the denominator, the square root of 9 is a perfect square and can be reduced to 3. Again, at this point, we can further reduce this fraction because the 18 in the numerator and the 3 in the denominator reduce to 6. Giving us 6 times the square root of 3 as the answer. Let's try solving the square root of 20 over the square root of 40. This problem is a little bit different because we have a radical in the numerator and a radical in the denominator. We should be able to use the same technique to solve this problem. First, we're going to multiply the numerator and the denominator of this fraction by the denominator, the square root of 40. Once you multiply this fraction by the denominator, you will be left with the square root of 800 over the square root of 1600. Looking at the numerator, the square root of 800, 800 is not a perfect square. So, to reduce the numerator, you want to break 800 down into 2 factors. For this problem, I'm going to use the factors 400 and 2 because 400 goes into 800 2 times and 400 is a perfect square because 20 times 20 equals 400. Once I break down the numerator into those 2 factors, I'm able to reduce the numerator to 20 times the square root of 2. Now, looking at the denominator, the square root of 1600, 1600 is a perfect square. So I can reduce the square root of 1600 to 40 because 40 times 40 equals 1600. I will speed up the video to show you this process. Once the numerator and the denominator is reduced, we are left with the fraction 20 times the square root of 2 over 40. We can further reduce this fraction because the 20 in the numerator and the 40 in the denominator reduce to 1 over 2 or 1/2. Giving us the square root of 2 over 2 as the answer. Let's try one more problem. This one a little harder. Let's solve 4 over 8 plus the square root of 6. For this problem, the first thing you want to do is multiply the numerator and the denominator by the conjugate of the denominator. Now, the conjugate is where you change the sign in the middle of two terms. And you only use the conjugate with expressions with two terms, called a binomial. So the denominator is a binomial expression. Once you multiply the fraction by the conjugate, you will have 4 times 8 minus the square root of 6 over 64 minus 8 times the square root of 6 plus 8 times the square root of 6 minus the square root of 36. Looking at the denominator for a second, you can combine all the like terms and replace the square root of 36 with 6 because 36 is a perfect square. This fraction would then reduce to 4 times 8 minus the square root of 6 over 64 minus 6. Looking at the denominator, we need to subtract 6 from 64 to get 58. Now that we have 58 in the denominator, we can reduce this fraction further by dividing the numerator and the denominator by 2, giving us 2 times 8 minus the square root of 6 over 29 as the answer. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe to the channel for more helpful content just like this. And remember, algebra is easy when you start with the basics.